We are live with Bob Fletcher.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Brother Bob, we're here tonight to talk about one of the greatest conspiracies that's probably in the last 100 years at least, Planet X. From what I've researched, from 1900 until now is when it really started coming to the surface, and more specifically, it seemed like after 1970 into the mid-'80s it was really talked about, and then it disappeared, and now it's making a comeback. So let's just take a moment and talk about, because I believe Planet X is tied into the sixth seal in Bible prophecy. I believe it is probably almost sure what causes that sixth seal. But could you just let's open it up there,
sure,
and let's talk about Planet X, and just give me all you know on the subject. And where did it start with you?
That'll take a couple of months, but let's just scrape on the surface today. About 3 years ago, I had several people contact me, and they said, Bob, I have films of the construction of underground facilities all over the United States.
Our black budget, for instance, garners $1.023 trillion every 2 years. It's over $500 billion a year. Right now, there are 131 active deep underground military bases in the United States. There's 1,477 of them worldwide. Each one has an average cost of $17 to $19 billion.
And that came to me from several people. Some of them were truck drivers who told me fantastic stories about having an 18-wheeler, 40-foot truck filled with foodstuffs being delivered into a government facility, and they would follow the map where they were supposed to go, and there was nothing out there. Let's say it was outside of Texas in the desert area, and they would go, and the side of the mountain would open up, and they would drive down inside of a mountain, and it would close behind them. They would tell me about going into an underground facility in Tennessee and driving for 600 miles under the ground. Those things were a little mind-boggling and pretty fanciful type of a report for me. So I kind of put it on the back shelf. These people sent me pictures, and they sent me what were VHS videos at that time, but I didn't know what to make of them. It didn't mean anything, so I sort of put it on the side burner, so to speak, the back burner. But now this is about 3 years ago, I started putting all of the dots connected all of the dots. And what had taken place in approximately 83, apparently with the launching of a new infrared telescope being put way out in the far reaches of the solar system. Apparently, Planet X, or the planet called Nibiru, which is mentioned in all the biblical writings, it's mentioned in all Bibles and scriptures from many foreign nations. It's mentioned in historic writings of the Chinese emperor 2,000 years ago. It's written on the side of the walls of temples that were 4,000 years old. There was a study done a while back of the clay tablets that were from Sumeria that had been completely broken down and analyzed by a man named Sitchin, S-I-T-C-H-I-N, and he had deciphered clay tablets. There's 25,000 of these tablets. They actually went back 4,000 years, and they described Nibiru, the Planet X, and its relationship to coming back like Halley's Comet, coming back and going around the sun every once in a while, and then going way back out again in orbit, way out past Pluto, and coming back again in a couple thousand years. And this coincided with the biblical talk. It was called Wormwood in the Bible, and it's described in, like I said, a whole multiple of biblical scriptures of sorts coming from around the globe, 2,000, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago in the case of the Sumerian clay tablets. So what they described is Nibiru being a planet in a huge elliptical orbit, similar to that. Like I say, I compare it to Halley's Comet that comes by every 75 years. There's another comet that we recently discovered that came around in 1997. That was called the Hale-Bopp Comet. It is similar to Halley's Comet, except that the orbit that the Hale-Bopp Comet is in has been calculated to be 4,200 years. Now that's 600 to 800 years longer than the proposed orbit of Nibiru, or Planet X. So originally I thought, wow, you talk about 3,000 year, 3,600 year orbit of a planet. That's really amazingly large. I thought almost that was ridiculous. But once I realized and got into it and found out that we did have the Hale-Bopp Comet of 4,000 years, well, then that took my excuse looking like it was a crazy number. That just erased that. So I started studying the people that really have been into studying the planet X or Nibiru for many, many lifetimes, or a long time, or following up on other people's studies. And there's several people that have spent their entire last 30 or 40 years just studying the astronomical potential of Planet X. Now, and get back to where I was, in 1983, apparently it was discovered sufficiently that scientific people at a very high level came into President Reagan and George Bush, the vice president, and said, we got a problem. It looks like now we found Planet X that's been talked about, like you mentioned earlier at the beginning. It's been talked about at least and written about, of course, going way back, but in modern times, in 1960 and 50, there was writings about it in Life magazine and Reader's Digest and Lookton magazine, all the major media of that time in the 50s and the 60s. But apparently around 83, Ronald Reagan and his people were told that this is on its way back in and that it had been discovered, and now what are we going to do? All right, so at that point it changed everything in Washington. And what you had now was this handful of large numbers of, I'm going to refer to them all as, excuse me, criminal, corrupted persons out of government, and they decided that what we have to do, obviously, is if this thing's coming back, we've got to expand underground facilities that are going to hold enough people so that our families and our immediate, most important, wealthy people of the United States are going to have a place to hide. They called it continuity of government, and they built 103 of these underground facilities underground in the United States. When I started investigating, I ended up being able to get plenty of information on them, including most of the locations. Additionally, we have live footage and photographs of the underground facilities. Again, not all of them. Most of them, of course, are secret to above top secret in their classification. I also started looking into it to find out what the status was on other foreign nations, because something of this sort coming back, a biblical event that will devastate the globe, obviously has to be known also to the highest levels of other governments. What I found out is that Russia in 2010 put out a mandate that by 2015 that they would have 5,000 underground facilities prepared for as many people as they could in Russia. I found out they had one large facility. Actually, they have several large, but one of them's big enough to hold as many as 30,000 or 40,000 people underground. I discovered that the European major nations have been also building underground facilities. And then I also discovered, which anybody can look up because it is part of public information in general, you can look up what's called the Seed Vault of Norway or Denmark. They have built a giant international cooperative seed vault, maintains billions of seeds in the to be hidden away. It's underground in the side of a mountain. You can look it up on a computer. Just put International Seed Vault, and you can find it yourself on the computer. This is a storage facility maintaining all of the necessary seeds to reseed the globe, the entire face of the earth, or as much as they want or can, after the complete devastation similar to the original floods of Noah, which is what Nibiru, Planet X, will potentially bring upon the globe when it comes close to the earth. All right, it's been researched sufficiently that the Planet X has come around several times in the past. Now, and when it has happened, it has varied in the degree of devastation. However, it has come around several times, and this is documented geologically, etc. But here's what you're looking at that fits both, or actually 5 situations, if you will, but at least the 2 that you mentioned. And it's not a matter of theory in terms of the Wormwood and meteors falling.
Sure, because that's the picture right there. That is going to happen.
Right. And now I'm going to tell you exactly how it's going to happen according to putting together all of the dots, connecting all of the dots, not only political, historical, biblical, and non-biblical scriptures written on the top of the mountains by the Tibetan monks that recorded it when it came around, and the emperors of China that wrote it down. And there's a fellow named Gil Brouchard who has done unbelievable, wonderful investigations on the biblical side of this and can explain a day-to-day description of when it has passed previously and what had taken place and what will take place once again when it passes around the sun and back out.
Gil has been on the show.
Okay, you know Gil, you know his work. I am completely in line with about every single thing that Gil has come up with, but the only difference between he and I is that I brought in all of the other dots. I connected the politics, the money, the theft, the fraud, and the corruption, and put it all together, the underground facilities that have been built by these people, stealing your money and our money to build them, by the way. You know, billions of dollars under the ground in these facilities. They're so huge, they would take your breath away. Now, let me get back to my point, though. Here's the basics of what is described to most likely take place, and this relates to the scriptures, and I'm calling it that because it's just written word, not only biblical, but of all other ancient scribes that have put all this down in black and white, so to speak, going back many years, when they have actually, some of the people that had survived the previous passes and wrote about it and inscribed it in clay and did it in bronze castings and things of that sort, describing what took place. And of course they didn't understand what it was, but they described it exactly as it most likely will happen again. Now, here's where it fits into Wormwood and the meteor falling into the water and all of that. That's all obviously written in reasonably plain words in the Bible, so to speak. You don't have to draw too many wild conclusions about what's being described as things splashing into the ocean, etc., and causing great tidal waves, by the way. Tidal waves are going to be unbelievable, tsunamis when this comes around. But it will also be, part of that will be like Noah's flood, and it will be this planet, which is 5 times, calculated to be 5 times the size of Earth, will have a gravitational effect on the Earth that hasn't been seen since it came by the last time. Now, here's what basically will take place. When it comes back around, it will come in, and this is even according to Gil Broussard's wonderful work that he's done. It will come in and circle around the sun. It will go behind the sun. When it does, you have to remember this is going to be similar to what we see when we watch the Halley's Comet. When it goes by around the sun, but it's way, way, way out, and it's basically, that's just a frozen snowball, to make a simple description of it. So it comes around the sun. It has a long tail behind it, dragging behind it, goes around the sun, goes back out in a short time later, and goes back out for 75 years, not to return again for 75 years. The Hale-Bopp comet that I mentioned earlier does exactly the same thing, but it was bigger, by the way, than the Halley's Comet, and it drags its tail around behind the sun and then goes back out again, heading towards the far reaches of the solar system again. Now, when Planet X, or Nibiru, comes around, the difference is, number one, it is a solid mass 5 times the size of Earth. It will cause an eclipse of the sun for a period of time. It has 3 or 4 planets that are actually, I'm going to refer to them as moons, that travel with it and travel around it, similar to the situation with our moon relative to Earth. The moons will be dragged around with Nibiru at the same time, and then we will have a tail of debris being dragged along, gravitationally sucked along behind this the primary planet Nibiru. When it comes by, it will travel behind the sun. The Earth, on its regular rotation around the sun, will in fact pass through the tail of Nibiru. When it does that, you will have the equivalent of the biblical meteorites that fell upon the earth in hail and brimstone. They didn't know how to describe it, but basically we're going to have flaming meteors of different sizes, meteorites, crashing. Actually, we will be crashing through that debris. It will take about an hour travel time to pass through it. Then, bearing in mind now, the Nibiru would be ahead of the Earth, going around the sun, and it will take about 155 days for Nibiru to come out the other side and head back towards outer space once again, not to come back for some unknown period of time. Now, there's a debate between 2 or 3 different groups of people that have been studying this, and that's okay, because it doesn't affect the bottom line on this. The debate is whether it comes around in 3,005 or 3,600 years, or if it comes around 350 years, which is closer to the figure that Gil Broussard believes in, doing his studies. And he has very good information to back that potentially up in terms of the numbers of years. All right, so here's what I'm saying, where it doesn't make any difference to you and I. If this comes around in our lifetime, then we're talking, it doesn't make any difference if it's been out for 3,000 years or if it has come around 10 times 300, which would be 3,000 years, and coming around 10 times since that same period of time. So in other words, it doesn't make any difference if it's 3,000 or if it's coming around every 300 and 350 years. It does not make any difference, because if it comes during our lifetime, we are the ones that will have to face whatever it will bring with it. And the meteorites, those things where the biblical students talk about that being what is written of in the Wormwood, I believe what it is in reality, it is Nibiru itself is the Wormwood, and all of the debris that will hit Earth when we go through the tail of that thing. Actually, we will plunge through the tail, and it will take whatever. I think it's about 1 hour of actual going through the tail itself. It's actually mathematically been analyzed, but
cool.
That will bring with it, you see, that will bring with it a multitude of meteors, etc. And I must say this, we already have an increase and a multitude of effects today from Nibiru. Now, when we talk about the effects of Nibiru, see, the problem is going to be it's a multitude of effects on the Earth. But, unless you really get into studying the planets, etc., and become astronomically educated, which I don't pretend to be. I'm the messenger relative to that information put together by 1,000 astronomers and scientists over a couple thousand years. And I don't pretend to be the 100% expert on all of that. But I was able, because of my background, I was able to connect the dots, to make sense out of things. It's like, why wouldn't, for example, over all since 1983, which is a period of time when this, I believe the realization really settled in to the bad guys in Washington that this was a reality and was going to change their lousy, corrupted plans, because all of a sudden they had to worry about survival of their own families. So it changed things from just plain stealing and going about their normal one-world government concept. This sort of threw a monkey wrench into it. The wealthiest are all digging holes to go underground. They have them finished for the most part. They're continuing them, making them better, making them bigger, and making them more full with survival materials and foods for themselves in the United States and all the rest of around the globe. Now, relative to the Mideast, see, that's all amazingly biblical. The outrageous increase and expansion of this ISIS group, well, they're not a handful of bandits. They have billions of dollars that they have stolen. They went, I'm not counting what they may have different countries backing them that we don't know about, corrupted governments, but they literally went into bank after bank and stole every penny that was in there, whether it was American dollars, gold on deposit, or in fact dinars, their own money. They have billions of dollars in their pockets. They have stolen billions and taken over billions of dollars worth of extraordinarily serious weapons. These guys have serious weapons. They're not throwing stones and picking up pistols with six-shooters. They have missiles. They've got everything you would want to continue what they're doing. It is biblical, obviously. It's the amazing confrontation of the Muslim versus the Christian. If people don't realize that and how biblical that is, they might as well just go back to sleep and have another drink, because they're just not paying attention. Now, the timeline in 1983 being approximately when it really was seriously accepted in Washington that this thing was coming back and it's going to really do a number on the Earth. period. It will constitute Noah's floods once again. The Earth, more than likely, will end up tilting 26 degrees on the axis of Earth. The biblical accounts and the worldwide accounts, going back to the old emperors in China who wrote these things down in diaries, and they literally tracked what they called the flaming dragon or the visiting star. They tracked that across the sky for the 155 days that it took to go around the sun and back out. During that period of time, on the entire globe, there was global reaction of floods, crazy weather, meteor storms, fires, everything that you could imagine. And by the way, one reason that they know that it was a 26-degree shift of the axis is that one of the a particular thing called the sky disk was discovered that was literally a 12-inch Bronze Age disk that on it is the description of the passing of Nibiru causing the blocking of the sun, the eclipse of the sun for a period of time. When it passed, there were actually galactic, all the stars were written and drawn into this. It's like a picture. It's a 12-inch piece of bronze highlighted in gold. It was discovered in 1999 in Germany. And so these people had survived it, and they drew the equivalent of drawing a picture of this thing passing. But the sky disk was dated. This was done 3,600 years ago, and it described Nibiru passing at that time. All right? And it gives it, it says it was, I believe, if I'm going by memory now because I don't have it in front of me, I think it was April the 10th of 3,600 years ago, April the 10th at 8:30 in the morning. The amount of information that has been generated from many, many people studying this brings it down to where we can do a rough calculation as to when Nibiru may pass through close by once again, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute. The big deal is this. Here's what's going to happen, provided if, and I have to preface this. 5 years ago, if you had come to me and asked me to even do a study or even look into this report on Planet X, et cetera, with the knowledge information I had 5 years ago, I would not have touched this with a 50-foot pole. I'm not going to put my name on a report as crazy sounding as this was or would have been. I would never put my name on it. I wouldn't have touched it. But progressively, I realized that the only thing, and once I learned all the information that has been put together on Nibiru and its previous passing, and the biblical scriptures about it, once I had learned that and put it together with everything else, there is nothing else on the face of the earth that would cause the major governments of the world to dig survivable space under the ground and into the sides of the mountains to hide themselves away. There's nothing else that fits it, period. They have taken over, we have taken, in the United States, we have taken over what was NORAD's facilities in Cheyenne Mountain. There are no longer equipment in there for checking and tracking missiles and weapons of that sort. That's what it was originally built for. It has been taken over. It is one of the new hideouts for the elite to run into the mountains when Nibiru passes close. It's one of the 100 and some that we have in America. The Chinese have thousands, and I have pictures and films of this. The Chinese actually have facilities so large under the mountains, into the mountains, and the sides of hills that they have stored entire fleets of airplanes and battleships. Now, it's been calculated related to all of the information put together, put into a computer and kicking out the analysis of the most likely time for its return, the second least likely time, and then the third very least likely time to be passing back by. Now, this is going to upset some people. The possibility is very high, according to Gil Broussard and many other people, and the relationship to when it has been passing previously, is that it will be seen in December, and it will take several months for it to come close enough to go around the sun. But it will be seen in December of this year. And then we will have January, February, and then the key months for it to be closest to pass near the Earth and causing the most trouble would be March and April of next year. And then it will head back out, and whatever damage it's done will be finished, and we'll be licking our wounds. If it is not seen, and what I'm talking about seen is where it's up there and it looks like a new star up there in the sky coming inward, it will be getting bigger every month, every week, a little bit bigger. It will look like a single star originally, even though there's probably a couple of moons going around with it and a lot of space junk. It'll be seen in December. It'll get bigger in January, February, and then March and April, make its journey around the sun and back out. The journey around the sun and back out is probably 155 days. Now, all of the best scriptures and information related to when it had passed before and was written in, logged in, and drawn, sketched out, and all the rest of that, it has always been, apparently, in March and April, like the Passover period of time. All right. In fact, we don't see it this December, and with it coming in, then we probably have a complete year to wait for it to come. If it still has not arrived in that second year from today, if it's still not on its way in, then we would be into 3 years of March. Okay, in other words, March or April, 3 years from now. But the consensus is that it's very likely to be seen this December and to pass in the March of April of next year. All right. Now, it's not my estimate. That's an estimate of other people that are I consider to be the experts. Now, here's something else that's very important. This is where the politics fits into this thing. The people that are keeping this secret from us, all right? A lot of people say, when will they tell us this is coming? They will never formally announce that this is coming in, all right? They are going to have, this is from the point of view of the bad guys, all right? The guys that have the tickets to go underground in the underground facilities and bring their families with them, all right? Those guys are going to have martial law declared in the United States a few months before 100,000 astronomers start seeing this thing appearing on the horizon, coming in as a new star. So, what are we talking about? If the timeline is being seen first in December and January, they will have to have some form of martial law a few months before that in the United States. So they will have complete control over the general public when it starts to become a riot on the surface of the earth. If the leaders of any of the major nations came out and told the world that this thing is going to be coming in 5 months or 2 months or 6 months, that this thing was going to be coming by, it would be the end of all things. The financing would be, the entire globe would go into riots. So it's not going to be announced. They will never tell us. Now, the next question is, how would they get away with declaring martial law? because they have to have the general public to go along with it. They can't just do this. They have to have the public believing that it's a good idea for martial law. All right? So it'll be one of three things. It'll either be some major terroristic acts, like 9/11 type thing, chemical, biological, or something like that, across the country in several places. If they announce that it looks like Russia is going to have a direct confrontation of World War III for some reason or another, and or Red China, that will be good enough for martial law. And the third one of possibility is obviously an outbreak of an uncontrollable disease like Ebola or something like that, getting large enough that it would be a believable reason for martial law. One of those three is going to constitute, and again, the best sign for people to understand when this thing might be coming around is when you see that martial law genuinely starting to take place. So then that's going to be the only thing that the average American public is going to be able to understand. And again, it could be even the solar flares. The solar flares that they were talking about, the head of the CIA, James Woolsey, the solar flares that he and Janet Napolitano was talking about, again, all of these will be part and parcel to the passing of Nibiru whenever that takes place. And unfortunately, it looks like it may be within 3 years. And again, our sign that's going to be a realistic signature is going to be when they pull the need for martial law in America. It literally is the most important report that I have ever done, and I have done reports at the request of the Senate Intelligence Committees. I have done reports directly for dictator Manuel Noriega's lawyers. I have done reports for congressional and Senate investigations for 25 years, and I would never do this as a frivolous bunch of baloney. I am absolutely a complete, firm believer in what I have completed here.
Renaissance astronomers describe the solar system as a giant clockwork mechanism in which a series of cosmic interlocking gears determine the movements of the planets. But we now know that the orbits of the planets are not as fixed as they appear.
It seems so steady, it seems like it is this clockwork, but there are ways in which it can be disrupted quite dramatically.
Even a slight change in the Earth's orbit could severely impact our ability to survive, since the position of our home planet makes it uniquely suited for life.
The Earth seems to be an ideal planet in terms of habitability because it lies at just the right distance from the sun, in which point liquid water can be stable on our surface. We can have oceans and lakes and rivers, and we think that water is really the key ingredient for life.
Earth is in that special zone. It's not too cold, nor too hot, it's just right. If we were closer to the sun, we might end up like Venus, a planet too hot to live on, with a temperature hot enough to melt lead. On the other hand, if we were farther away, we might be more like Mars, which is just ridiculously cold, and you can't support life when you're too far from the sun.
But what would happen if Earth's delicate balance were disturbed, so that it was no longer this perfect distance from the sun? Far beyond our solar system, there are planets wandering through the galaxy, not bound to the gravity of any star. Known as rogue planets, they were ejected from their birthplace by unstable orbits or cosmic collisions and sent on wild trajectories through the universe.
Essentially, a rogue planet is a planet that was originally in a different star system, and it was kicked out and is now wandering the cosmos, divorced from its parent star.
There's likely to be at least as many planets as there are stars. So we expect there's something like 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and so we expect a couple 100 billion of these rogue planets.
These rogue planets are interstellar nomads, cold, devoid of life, and careening through the darkest reaches of space. And many of them are likely to be giants, hundreds of times larger than Earth.
Right now we're seeing more so-called Jupiter-sized planets than others. Based on that, you could expect an average rogue planet to be on the order of a Jupiter-sized planet, maybe less.
With billions of rogue planets in our galaxy, it's possible that one could swing through our solar system with monumental effects.
A rogue planet coming into the solar system will probably be moving at hundreds of miles per second.
It's possible that a rogue planet could hit the Earth directly, completely demolishing our planet. But a rogue planet would not even have to get near the Earth to create havoc.
The nightmare scenario is that one of these large rogue planets drifts right through our solar system and ends up disturbing the orbit of one or more of the larger planets. And because these larger planets like Jupiter actually help shepherd the inner planets, it ends up elongating the inner planets' orbits, which would dramatically change things for life on Earth.
It's almost like taking a baseball bat to the Earth, the rogue planet being the bat, and just the force from this planet will be so great that you just change the path of the Earth just in the same way that a bat can change the path of the baseball on its way to the catcher's glove.
And if Earth's orbit were elongated just enough to swing outside the habitable zone, our very survival could be at stake.
The habitable zone, as we understand it in any star system, is defined by what we call the triple point of water. You find water in all three phases: liquid, solid, and gas. And as so far as we know, you need that in order for life to be able to survive. And when you start making Earth's orbit more elliptical, you start touching the fringes of this habitable zone where it can be a little warm for all three phases or a little cool for all three phases. We're still there, but it doesn't take much to shove a planet's climate over the edge and either make it a super hot Venus or lead it to a very cold Mars.
Since there has never been an encounter with a rogue planet in recorded history, scientists are unsure of how the event would play out.
So we really can't know with great certainty what is going to happen if a rogue planet comes into our solar system. We can run computer models, we can make educated guesses, but at this point it's a purely hypothetical phenomenon.
Here is one possible scenario. A rogue planet suddenly appears on the fringes of our solar system. As the rogue streaks past the outer planets, the whole solar system begins to change. The rogue's gravitational pull alters the orbit of Jupiter. Jupiter, in turn, pulls the Earth out of its nearly circular orbit to an elliptical orbit.
If it passed near the Earth, then the Earth's orbit would be changed almost instantaneously.
This new orbit takes the Earth as close to the Sun as Venus and as far out as Mars. Although we still remain in the habitable zone in this new elliptical orbit, our climate would begin to alter drastically. For most, the change is so gradual that at first it's hardly noticed. The days grow longer and the nights get colder, but life goes on as before. But over the next few months, a slow-motion global disaster begins to unfold.
There's a common misconception that the Earth's seasons are driven by our distance either toward or away from the sun, where summer is when the Earth is closest to the sun and winter is when it's farthest away. That's not true. Right now, it's the Earth's tilt that causes summer and winter. So when your side of the planet's facing toward the sun, it's summer. And when your side of the planet's facing away, it's winter.
The entire planet would have summer at the same time because it's very close to the sun, and then the entire planet then experiences winter at the same time when you're farthest away from the sun.
So the Earth would enter a new climate phase where you would have short but intense summers and then very long winters.
So life on Earth is very much dependent on the orbit we are in around the sun.
The shift in our seasons would wreak havoc on Earth's agriculture, resulting in a shorter growing period and eventually mass food shortages.
The effect could be very dramatic and really affect the prospects of life on Earth. if we're very unlucky, could end life on Earth.
As the climate catastrophe continues, the Earth struggles to adapt, and the worst is yet to come. Imagine that a rogue planet has suddenly passed through our solar system and alters the Earth's orbit. A new elliptical path draws us closer to the sun, and a climate catastrophe ensues. World temperatures would increase dramatically. Runaway global warming causes ice caps and glaciers to melt, raising the sea levels around the world by 3 feet or more.
Now, 3 or 4 feet of sea level rise may not seem like a lot. Let's think about Lower Manhattan, New York City. It's protected by a seawall, which is about 5 feet high at average tide. And at high tide, the tide is about 2 feet below the top of that seawall. Now, if you're adding 3 or 4 feet on top of that, now you've got the ocean in New York City, in the subway system, and the financial district without a storm even being present.
With just a few feet of sea level rise, you have a lot of problems because most of the major cities of the world are built on or near the ocean. And they're designed with infrastructure such as subway systems, for example, or sewer systems that are not designed to handle more than a foot or two of sea level rise. And so when you have those first few feet, it causes major costs. But then when you go beyond that, you're talking about cities literally disappearing off the map. But if we warm the planet significantly more, let's say 10 degrees, then you're talking about all of Greenland and all of Antarctica melting. When they're all melted, you're going to have 250 feet of sea level rise, which is literally wiping most of the major cities off the map totally.
With much of the coastal areas flooded, hundreds of millions of people would be forced to move inland, away from the ocean and the rising temperatures.
Basically, all the habitable areas as they are now would tend to shift away from this increasingly hot equatorial region up north to preserve the way of life as we have it.
The migration would tax life support systems and stretch government infrastructures around the world to the breaking point.
One of the biggest impacts that a big climate change or a shift like that would cause is agriculture would stop. Food is effectively governed by a seasonal pattern that we take for granted. And if that goes away, then you can imagine a scenario where we don't have enough food to feed the population, economy breaks down, and that would actually become more dangerous to society than the actual climate change that we would experience.
But the worst is not over. Environmental effects from a rogue planet would continue to be felt across the globe.
It wouldn't be just one area of the planet which would be affected by these sorts of phenomena. The whole planet would suffer during the summertime when the planet was closest to the sun. You'd have incredible heat waves, incredible droughts over the entire planet.
More areas become arid, with large sand and dust storms blanketing cities and making it dangerous for people to leave their houses.
You might find entire populations walking outside with respirators on all the time just because it's so dusty.
And temperatures of 140 degrees would threaten our very survival.
Once the temperature reaches 130 degrees, you can't survive that. You can't sweat fast enough to cool your body. And if you're outside without air conditioning, then you're just going to die.
And with the Earth's orbit altered and the planet closer to the sun, deadly wildfires are just a lightning strike away. Massive firestorms would devastate thousands of square miles of forests and grasslands.
You're going to have problems not only with drought, you're also going to have wildfires because any vegetation that's cooking in that kind of heat is going to be highly dried out and subject to bursting into flame.
But it's not just extreme heat that threatens us. It's also the cold, a new ice age, as the catastrophe continues. Imagine the gravitational impact of a rogue planet has altered the Earth's orbit, causing it to be much more elliptical. This shift would have a drastic effect on the weather. runaway, supercharged global warming, leading to floods, droughts, widespread wildfires, and extreme swings in temperature. Ironically, the global warming caused by the new altered orbit could cause certain areas to freeze over.
One of the big misconceptions about global warming is that every place on the planet gets hotter all at once. Well, that's not true. The climate system is much more complex than that. So when you add more heat to the system, there are all sorts of feedback mechanisms that start to kick in. Like when you heat the water, it becomes water vapor. Well, water vapor makes clouds, and clouds reflect all the sunlight back to space. Well, that is going to have a cooling effect. So it's very likely that you could have areas of the Earth get much colder while other areas get much hotter. One potential effect of global warming is that Britain ices over. You have a new ice age at the same time that you get massive droughts in the U.S.
Some scientists fear that global warming could also lead to a shutdown of the thermohaline circulation, a giant conveyor belt that distributes warm and cold water around the globe.
Think of it as a tractor in the ocean that's carrying cold water from the Arctic and forcing warm water up from the tropics. And what that does is it cools down the equatorial region and heats up the Arctic.
Now, if that circulation were to change because of the substantial differences in Earth's orbit, then you would have a situation where Europe would have a much different climate, and North America as well, because a lot of heat gets transported by ocean currents.
A shutdown of the thermohaline circulation could accelerate global warming as the polar ice caps continue to melt. Very cold air mixes with warmer air. Tropical storms could become stronger, and more frequent superstorms would be born. The constantly hot equatorial zone will produce more water vapor in the air, which could lead to larger and more frequent cyclones and hurricanes.
That's going to cause flooding when you do happen to have a situation where you've got rain falling. So both drought and storms are going to get worse with a very hot planet like that.
And if ocean temperatures were to rise above 115 degrees Fahrenheit, we could face a special breed of superstorm called a hypercane.
Now, that is a type of hurricane/tornado that gets to a wind speed of 500 miles per hour. It's been theoretically shown that if you heat up a large enough area of the ocean, say maybe 50 or 100 miles in diameter, to a temperature of 115 degrees, you could get one of these theoretical storms that go way up in the upper stratosphere and cause incredible destruction wherever they hit. A hypercane you could think of as a tornado on steroids or a hurricane on steroids, kind of a cross between the two, much more powerful than either, which would destroy any structure in its way.
This climate catastrophe projection might seem like a worst-case scenario. But if a rogue planet did alter the Earth's orbit, many scientists believe we would have something much bigger to fear. It's possible that the Earth itself could become a rogue planet.
The Earth's orbit would change by a larger and larger amount, and the Earth might eventually get ejected from the solar system and become a rogue planet itself.
The Earth itself wouldn't be destroyed. It would remain intact. But as we went farther and farther away from the sun, the surface would cool and the atmosphere would freeze, and if we had any chance of survival, we would have to dig down into or toward the mantle where the radioactive elements are keeping the Earth's core hot, and we would become subsurface dwellers in order to survive. To us on Earth, it would look like the nights would get longer and longer, the days would get fainter, till eventually it's perpetual night, and the sun becomes just a bright star in the starry night sky, and that's it for the rest of time.
These doomsday scenarios may seem like the stuff of science fiction, but with billions of rogue planets wandering through space, the threat is real. Luckily, scientists around the world are developing the tools necessary to spot these rogue planets long before they arrive in our solar system.
Disasters have wiped out the planet before.
We know that these things are a threat. We know they're going to hit again.
Nothing lasts forever. Forecasting the end. Next on the Weather Channel.
What if a rogue planet streaks through the solar system and pulls the Earth into an elliptical orbit, causing an environmental disaster? This new orbit would generate extreme weather events that threaten the very survival of the human race. In an attempt to combat this potential catastrophe, scientists are scanning the skies in hopes of detecting these rogue planets before they become a threat.
We use mainly two telescopes, one for the discovery itself. It has a very good wide field capability.
This telescope, known as the CFH, or the Canada-France-Hawaii Telescope, is located atop the summit of Mauna Kea in Hawaii and is one of the most advanced of its kind in the world.
And then for the spectroscopy, we went to the VLT. So that's really a cutting-edge telescope. Then you see the chemical composition. So we're not just seeing a little point moving, we're seeing really the composition of the object.
These VLTs, or very large telescopes, consist of 4 individual scopes and operate at both visual and infrared wavelengths. They are capable of detecting objects 4 billion times fainter than can be seen by the naked eye.
So these are really massive telescopes, and they gather data, and then you spend a lot of time, usually years, analyzing the data.
Etienne and his team have been successful in finding hundreds of rogue planets, but one planet in particular stands out among the rest.
So this planet was discovered as we were looking for failed stars. It's about the same diameter as Jupiter, so a bit more than 10 times the size of the Earth.
We didn't know if there were other planets out there or if planets were common. Now we know that planets are common, and we've found more than 800 with a possibility of 2,000 now, and that number is only going to get bigger as our telescopes get better.
In principle, a rogue planet could enter our solar system, and if it does enter and if it comes close, then it disrupts the orbit. Of course, it can have catastrophic impacts, ultimately to wipe out the biosphere.
Fortunately, astronomers have yet to spot any rogue planets headed our way. Our ever-evolving technological advancements and understanding of space has also shown us how delicate the balance of life really is, and that our orbit, at least for now, is in a perfect position.
Here in the 21st century, we live in kind of a Goldilocks zone for life on Earth. It's not too hot or too cold here. So let's work on keeping us right in the Goldilocks zone. We don't want to move too far on either side. It's not so good for civilization and life on Earth.